All I ask is that you make this one hard decision for me.
Solve the World, a fictional adventure told in 100 episodes. Episode 31, Three Paths. Lex's knees buckled. She was regretting at this point not diving into the Relaxa Spa. She peered down at the other two. Despite the numbered man's strange and quite frightening words, they seemed peaceful down there. Serene, even. She envied them.
I am a man, not just a regular man. So, I, of course, like options. Don't we all? All of us are regular mans. We like our options. We like strolling down that aisle, examining closely all 432 varieties of detergent. We feel wise for having chosen one out of 432. We are not racked with self-doubt, or a debilitating sense that we've surely chosen the wrongest detergent of them all, that we've had the veil pulled over our eyes, that, in fact, the right detergent was that one we didn't even give a second chance to. We scoffed at it. It didn't say linen fresh on the label, so we thought nothing of it. We were so very, 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 very confident that the best detergents say linen fresh on them. The fact that detergent choice number 104 said nothing at all about linen freshness, but only exclaimed in large print, "Detergent. Work good," was the final nail in its sad, sad coffin, wasn't it? Speaking of coffins, thanks for the hand. So-called Jenn free. It's really been handy to have around here. Number 819 brought it to me. Should I build a coffin for it, buried in the sand? Or will you be wanting it back? I can get it back to you, you know. Your hand can be stitched up ever so delicately. It won't even hurt, I promise. And you know my promises are trustworthy. Because I am trustworthy. Trustworthy! You'd pay $1 million to be as trustworthy as I am. You can't even dream of my trustworthiness.
Waiting in the underground spa, or was it a natural lake, Jenn stared up at the speakers with a sense of open perplexity. The sensory numbing of the spa had worked its charms on Jenn. She didn't feel frustrated or anxious, or scared, or really anything in response to the sounds of the speakers. She was just openly perplexed. The numbered man's words rolled out the way palindromes feel. When Jenn first learned about palindromes, she thought they were neat. But then in the hearing of much longer palindromes, ones longer than Dad, Mom, and Wow, she had this slightly incredulous feeling about them. As if, somewhere deep down, Jenn didn't actually believe that "Live on, O evil Naomi" was a palindrome. Somehow, it was breaking the laws of word physics. And it shouldn't be. But, however its voodoo worked, it's such a dumb thing that no one should actually care how it runs its trenchant chicanery. It was in that same weird, vague way of listening to unending palindromes that Jenn harked her attention back to the talk of her lost hand. The numbered man went on.
If you make a certain choice, dare I say the right choice, then you and I will sink our talons into this mortal toil, and you shall have your hand anew. See? Do you see? It's so simple. Okay. On to the show. Your options, if you please, and your decision I greedily await. You see, I can make my dreams come true on this island, but I have no one to share it with. I want someone to be a co-ruler with me, a goddess among the living, a wife.
A shiver ran down Lex's spine and would not abate.
I've said I'd give you 3 options. This is option 1. You give me one of the two women as a bride, and I'll let the other two go. Simple. This is the option I prefer. I understand, I really do. People can't make love happen. You can't will yourself to love and will yourself into meaningful submission. So I offer you an alternative. 2 alternatives, in fact. The 3 of you join our ranks. That is option 2. You'll be experimented on. I've used humans before. Regrettably, it doesn't always work to plan. But we're getting better all the time. There's a good chance, a really good chance, I'd get things right with you. And you'd be so thankful to me for having improved you so inconceivably. That's option 2. That's the ticket. You become my specimens for further experimentation. I've never worked on an unwilling client before. Scratch that. There was the thing with number 014. And then the 702, 703 twins. And 169 wasn't exactly something I'd call mutual. Well, the point is, I won't force you to be my little experimentees either. I'm at this place in time, you see. I'm willing to go that distance. I don't need you. I can make my manifestations come to life. Come to complete, apple-plucking luscious fruition without you. So, it's just an alternative option, you see. And of course, then there's option number 3. You refuse option 1, you refuse option 2, you get option 3. That's the option I'd like to call the nuclear option. You won't like what happens next. You won't. I love you. And so I need to be honest with you. Option 3 is a bad deal for me, for you, for everyone. And let's face the facts here. Choosing option 3 would be the least loving thing for you to do. It would, in a word, be hateful. This world runs on hate. You know that, right? That's why my creation, my plan, my great dream realized is just about the best thing possible for the world, and the only hopeful destiny left for planet Earth. Let's summarize, shall we? I hate when people aren't clear and concise, don't you? Oh, and lest I forget, as soon as you choose, I'll let you into my little secret. My realm of ideas, my plan, and my cause. That's a promise. A trustworthy promise. Summary. Now, here it is. Option 1. One of you beauties takes me as your wedded groom. Don't worry, we can make a marvelous dress for you. And when you do that, when you say, I do, then your friends will be given a front row boat and an exit plan. And we all live happily ever after. Perfect! You should choose this option. Hooray! When you choose this option, hooray. Option 2, you can't summon up the lovey-doveys, so rather than take the dreadful path of option 3, you give yourself freely to be my experimentees, and most likely end up with marvelous superpowers. Though I want you to choose option 1, who's to say what wonderful mysteries will unfold if you choose the second option? In fact, over the years, you'll undoubtedly fall in love with me, and may even choose to marry me after all is said and done. You see, the bittersweet pill of option 2 isn't the end of the world, but option 3 is. Choose that abomination, and I'll end you. And just so you understand the stakes, my lovelies, oh, the tormented stakes. Don't choose 3, I beg you, don't you dare choose it. But, sigh. If you choose to be urchin haters, I'll have no choice but to end your souls. So that you understand, I can't just kill you. No, that'd be too easy. Many men have had courage when faced with death. Some folks even prefer death. Suicide is a real threat, people. I know that those demons knocked on my door more than once. Choose option 3, and it'll all happen so slow. You won't believe how slow. Remember, my friends, the Isles of Imagination know no end, and they go both ways. Both towards light, beautiful manipulations and stories, and towards doomed, hollow dreadfulness. Trust me, I know both routes. I've created things that... I can barely speak of them. They were horrid, abominable things. Yeah. There is a darkness that cannot end. Go, have a powwow. Sleep on it. Give me your answer in 12 hours.
Some hedgies gave Miles and Jenn towels. They marched back to their chambers silently. Once alone, or at least free from the listening ears of the hedge minions, Miles wrote in the ashy earth beneath them. He wrote these words: "Investigate. Meet back here in 1 hour." "Makes sense," Miles said. "Each separately?" Jenn said. "Yeah," Lex answered authoritatively. Miles, Jenn, and Lex turned towards the seemingly endless tunnels, each hoping to find a way out, or at least some ammunition to make a wise decision in the coming hours. Here, we must briefly depart ways from Jennifer Dash. Miles followed the dark gray trail. When one thinks of rays of light, one does not envision gray being on that scale, and this very strangeness attracted Miles to follow the certain strange underground path of gray stones. He weaved left and right, marking his trail back by smudging some of the illuminated stones with his handprint. He was careful to mark the rocks with his fingers pointing forward. That way, upon his return, he'd know to follow the smudge of his palm back to the allocated chamber. Miles came across several alcoves, chambers almost identical to the one the Hedgies had led the group to. Miles reckoned that there were plenty of inlets and grottos to hide in, if the time came to play a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek. 20 minutes of wandering led Miles to a particular ditch. At first it looked like a dead end, but upon further inspection there was an ash-colored ladder attached to the wall. And so Miles Fogg grabbed the rails and ascended. The ladder went up 20 feet or so before Miles climbed on top a path illuminated by brownish-yellow stones. He felt like he had to be close to the surface, maybe just 10 or so feet below. Maybe if he dug at the ceiling. The roofing was just low enough so that Miles had to slightly bend his head at the neck in order to walk. He went no more than 20 feet when the ceiling bloomed in front of him. A fork in the road presented itself. Forward was no longer an option. He could go left or right. Both ways looked identical and unending. But just at his back was a spiral staircase. He followed the stairs up with his eyes. It spiraled up and up. How was that possible? Where was the surface? Curiosity got the best of Miles, and he chose the stairs. Plodding up and up, round and round, he couldn't help but feel trapped in some sort of hideous M.C. Escher painting. Was it possible he was descending? Like when you're caught in a strong wave or current and think you're swimming up for air, but you're actually swimming down to your doom? Was that what was happening here? No, the spiral staircase ended, just stopped. It seemed as though the staircase ascended to nowhere, but then Miles caught sight of it. A small hole at shoulder height. It was completely black. Fitting into the space took an act of desperation. It clearly wasn't made for the proportions of a full-grown adult. Claustrophobics beware, the space Miles smuggled himself into was akin to pushing through a birth canal, the sides of the hole smashing and compacting as Miles wiggled through. In complete dark, Miles Fogg pushed on, searching for a revelation in the pitch black. Alexandra Keitel, meanwhile, followed the purple stone road that broke off from the blue trail Jenn chose to go. Lex's methodology was simpler than the others. Go straight. Never turn. But she did turn. Life changes, throws us for a loop. Lex was thinking about the infernal options the numbered man had given them. What did that name mean, anyway? When she heard it, a loud voice, speaking in some language. Although Lex was only fluent in a few languages, she took several courses in linguistics and felt confident she could identify almost any language group on Earth, save for some random African, Amazonian, maybe Polynesian tongues. And now apparently a Pacific Islander language, as she had no idea what sort of language she was hearing. It was coming out loud and barky, like that of a teacher or disciplinarian parent. The sounds weren't getting closer, so Lex stood still listening, trying to place the new intel. She couldn't. Though the noises astonished Lex, there was no momentary danger, so she slowly, carefully, followed the sounds. Lex described to herself the smattering of language as a kind of rhythmic chortling, and, as if to confirm Lex's earlier suspicions, there were various responses to the leading voice. What a wonder this all was. Since falling down the hole at the center of the island, Lex had felt like she'd lost her personal verve. She was a freaking cryptozoologist, for Pete's sake. She'd already seen 2 new, extremely distinct species of animals since landing here. How many of her colleagues would die, would straight up murder other people for the chance to see and hear and touch the things she's encountered? Probably all of them. First, the fanny pack sporting hedgies, which appeared to be remarkably intelligent, by the way. We're talking an intelligence on the level of Sasquatch. And then there was the completely mystifying beaked thing. It was funny. Lex had to actively focus on the memory of that thing to picture it. As bizarre as it was, and apparently as healing as it was, the image of it didn't stick very well in Lex's mind. She had a hard time picturing what it looked like. She wondered if there wasn't some evolutionary element to her forgetfulness. Maybe all cryptids have that ability. Maybe the beaked thing produces some fashion of pheromone that causes memories of it to be hazy. A forgetful haziness. Maybe if Lex wasn't a cryptozoologist, a specialist of the weird, she'd totally been taken in by the pheromone and forgotten entirely the beaked one in full by now. Maybe. But forget about the beaked thing. Right now, presently, there was this classroom of chortlers to pay attention to. Lex walked closer and closer, the chortling getting clearer with every step. Wait, it's not some new tongue, not some foreign, backwards people's language. The chortling was in English. Just barely recognizable. The stone colors went from purple to a smooth, crisp white as Lex neared the room of sounds. So close now. She was maybe 10 feet away from the Chamber of Secrets and Sounds when Lex decided to get down on hands and knees and crawl the rest of the way. She was going to see this thing through. The cryptozoologist in her finally was snapping into place, and it felt so good. Alexandra Keitel was finally in her comfort zone. And she was going to, at the very least, capture with her own eyes what these native chortlers were up to. On her own quest, Jennifer Dash found steps. Not a ladder, not a spiral staircase, but steps carved out of the ground, leading straight down. She counted the steps as she descended. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 19, 29, 39, 45, 67, 78, 89, 100, 130, 150, 200, 299, 300, 400, 490, 500, 600. When Jenn first came to the steps following the baby blue stones that looked so very pretty, there were walls on either side of her. As Jenn descended deeper, however, the walls stretched away from her. They crept so far out of reach, in fact, that Jenn now felt that she was descending into a great cavern of hell, with the only options being up, down, or falling into utter darkness. 780, 890, 950, 960, 970, 980, 990, 995, 996, 997, 998, 999, 1000. On the 1000th step, Jenn reached the base. On the ground beside her was a pile of white glowing stones. They were, Jenn realized, smooth and laying free from the earth around them. Besides this pile of stones, the base of the steps led onto a pitch-black realm of unknown proportions. What to do now was obvious. Jenn picked up a glowing white stone and walked around. In her hand, Jenn couldn't quite handle how bright her stone was. It wasn't just bright like the rest of the stones in this subterranean universe. No, this stone was bright like the day, like the tip of Gandalf the Great's staff. Jenn found herself unable to stare directly at the rock. Clearly, Jenn was at the base of a magnificent cavern. Around her were dozens of stalactites and stalagmites. The cavern ceiling looked to be, 100 feet up at least. Unlike the tunnels above, this place seemed more natural, the way a natural cave, untouched by mankind's hands, would look like. Jenn walked about, unsure of where to go. There wasn't any path, per se. There was no flight of stairs paving the way onward. So Jenn doodled about, hemming and hawing at the dribbly stalactites and mites, suppressing all fears that there were goblins or gadflies down here in the deep. She'd come so deep, Jenn wondered if this was the deepest cave on Earth, the centerest point anyone had ever naturally traveled. Then something caught her eye. Jenn cowered in worry that it was someone or something down here with her. But a quick scoping of her surroundings, white stone far outstretched, revealed the truth at hand. It was a cave painting, a great mural to the unknown viewer, and it was enormous. At least 25 feet tall, maybe double that in width. The picture was probably made, Jenn presumed, with ground-up glow rocks. Indeed, it glowed, but not brightly. It was a grim portrait. The perfect facade for a perverse underground Sistine Chapel. The painting was of dozens of children skipping along a path. All the children were of the same general age, maybe 6 or 7. But there were fat kids, round kids, black kids, white kids, brown kids, Asian and African kids, American and clearly European kids, all together. The thing was, not only were the children from all tribes and tongues, but from left to right they appeared to be from all time periods. The kids at the far left wore animal skins, had heavy ridges above their brows. The kids in the middle wore togas and then bright medieval uniforms. And the kids in the front of the line, at the far right, they wore t-shirts and blue jeans and held cell phones in their hands. One kid held a tablet in his hands as he marched. All of them, the children of every time period, every age, the offspring of every loving parent ever, they all frolicked and followed the man in red, the Pied Piper. Lex stuck her head past the chamber entrance. She was now lying down as near to the ground as possible. She was certain now she was listening to a classroom. She could hear distinctly the fidgets of bored and anguished listeners, as well as the chortling commander teacher's chalk scribbling against a board. Bravely, Lex snuck her first and only look at the classroom. 6 rows with 5 desks in each row. Each seat occupied. A teacher lecturing at the front of the class. This was a classic schoolroom. Only problem was that the room was filled with ghastly ghouls.
The right and left uncovered must be same both diagrams, hence C squared equals A squared plus B squared. The theorem may have been long known before Pythagoras.
Mercifully for Lex's eyes, the first 2 rows facing the teacher were filled up with the hedgehoggy creatures. They sat upright in their small seats, but they looked very uncomfortably folded into them. They held pencils in their hands and made marks on paper, just like real, regular students. Ahead of them, their teacher was made of something else entire. It stood awkwardly at maybe 4 feet tall, its back badly hunched over. It looked to be fighting the very natural urge to stand on 4 feet instead of 2. It looked to Lex to be some sort of cruel mixture of donkey and werewolf. It chortled and chortled and chortled on. Behind the hedges were all sorts of unidentifiable creatures. The one thing Lex was sure of was that these were not alien beings. They all had humanoid, or at least animal-like, parts. There were no little green men. They were genetic mutations, genetic freaks. Someone went crazy with their genetic conveyor belt. Trying to piece the memory back together in later days, Lex would associate the classroom with the movie The Fly, wherein a man gets mutated with a fly. All the bastard creatures in the room looked like the sad exploits of a Nazi experiment gone wrong. There was a horse with no legs and no eyes, a walrus with a human-esque mouth and tongue, several rows of fish-like dogs, or dog-like fish. In the back row at the far corner, Lex recognized the bird frog woman. She sat, her fat rolling over the desk, motionlessly. Lex questioned if there was any brain inside the repugnant drooler at all. 4 sentences were written, not on a chalkboard, but seemingly on the walls of the chamber itself. The 4 sentences gave Lex as many bad dreams in the coming days as any of the schooled monstrosities. It read, "Numbers are our freedom. When we sin, we dishonor our number forever. Sin takes away our freedom. Too much sin takes away our number.
Sin to provide numerical instances of theorem A squared plus B squared."
Lex had enough. As silently as possible, she rose to her feet and swiftly returned to her chamber. She was the first to return, and so had time to sit and think on what she'd just seen. Most disturbing was not the Pied Piper showing his face in this dark place in the bowels of the earth. No. It was what was painted above him. Looking down upon the Piper and his legions was a floating, giant ghost, spanning almost the entirety of the sky above the scene. The shape of it was not dissimilar to that of the ghosts from the old Pac-Man games. The ghostly form looked like a gelatinous dress with a face. And the face smiled down upon the Pied Piper. It was God, and he was happy with the work of his son. Whoever the artist was, he envisioned a God that delights in the accomplishment of the Pied Piper, and the Piper's Song of Sirens. Jenn had had enough. She abruptly made an about-face, poised to begin the long 1,000-step climb back to her chamber and her friends. But, behind the stairs, hidden in the shadow of the steps, there was another set of steps, descending yet further. These steps were much narrower, smaller, descending 180 degrees in the opposite direction as the larger ones. These steps oozed with ominous fervor. Jenn had gone this far, she might as well march to the very heart of the earth. And so she descended onward. Miles actively suppressed fear as he wedged himself onward through the dark. He didn't know why, but he felt important in that moment. Maybe it was that he felt like an old-timey explorer, unsure of what lay ahead in the same way that Magellan and his crew must have felt chills of excitement conquering the unknown high seas. But now, pause. There was a sound. Faint. Very faint. Miles didn't hear it at first because he was too busy scooting along, scratching the walls and making all manner of noises. But now, as he lay sandwiched in that small pipeline, he heard something. Water. Running water. Miles pushed himself through the darkness with double the fervor. If there was running water, there was a way out, right? Follow the water. The noise got louder and louder as he continued. This was a sizable amount of running water, a venerable river wild. The ashy ground below Miles started to become wet. A few more feet inching along and Miles began to sink into the ashy mud. Panic. The dimensions of his little crawl space barely allowed for wiggling at all, let alone for a full 180-degree turn. Miles had 2 options. Go forward, praying that the space opens up before the mud deepens and turns into a shrewdly constructed coffin. Or, option 2, smoosh himself backwards, little by little. The obvious answer was to wiggle in reverse. It would be frustrating, painful, and slow-going, but Miles Fa was confident he could survive this night and utter blackness if he dedicated himself to backing up. It might take an hour or more, but it could be done. Miles could live to see the sun yet. But the hope of what lay ahead embodied the hope of freedom. It was the hope of escaping from Witch Mountain. So Miles pushed on. He crammed his elbows below his stomach to create a wedge between the mud and his mouth and nose. He had to keep his face as high as possible. He squirmed on. The mud sank him deeper and deeper with every inch. He was confined now, trapped in the pitch black up to his chin in mud. He had made the wrong decision. He was going to die here. Jenn tiptoed down and down. She tried to count the steps, as she did on her first flight down, to keep her mind occupied on an objective, if nothing else. But the surmounting fear and memory of that celestial ghost smiling down on Piper blasted through the corridors of Jenn's mind. She couldn't keep track of the numbers, and by 27 was already utterly off course. Down there. Somewhere deep down, there was moaning. Far below yet, but it was true. There was a deep, cosmic groan. With that, there was no reason to go on. Jenn couldn't see anything, but the groan, the monstrous echo, solidified the fact that Jennifer Dash was not alone in this deep dungeon. She sprinted up the skinny stairs, back to the open cavern of Piper and God, didn't give the portrait even a faint moment of glance, but rather ascended the 1,000 steps back to her friends as quickly as humanly possible. Rushing back into the chamber, Jenn embraced Lex. The two hugged and coughed out sobs of relief. Each of them had secretly harbored doubts that this perverse underworld had eaten the others. After collecting themselves, the two ladies waited in silence for Miles Fa to return. An hour later, the once harbored doubts returned. 2 hours later, and Jennifer Dash chose to retreat into the dream world, wherein there was always peace. The god of Jenn's dreams didn't care for riches or gems, and he didn't smile upon the great deceivers of the world. Her dream god didn't care for the Pied Piper's fife. The women woke up to a wild-eyed, muddied from head to toe Miles Fa. At that moment, they too embraced Miles and said prayers of thankfulness for the return of their own. And just like that, all of Jenn's anger at Miles sifted away. Here was a man that was just as desperate as she was, just as hopeful for a better future, just as stretched as she was. He was just like her. He made quick and sometimes disastrous decisions. But that's what people have to do who don't hold all the cards. They improvise. They make the best of what they've got left. Standing there, scratched up as muddy as all get out, Jenn realized that Miles was just like her, no different. Miles then motioned for the women to follow him. He led them, not to the spiral staircase, not to the birth canal that led to muddy water, but to another chamber, just like their own. Maybe he's listening here too, but at least it's something. What happened to you? Jenn asked. What happened to you? Miles responded. The three swapped stories and visions. Each took as long as possible in their retelling of their solo journeys, trying hopelessly to avoid the inevitable. They remembered and remarked on every detail, every jot and tittle. Maybe they could talk their troubles away. But it wasn't to be. Eventually, all the stories dried up, and there was no more to tell. Now, it was time to make a decision. Now, it was time to face the numbered man, and choose one of his wretched options. Hey, Solve the World is produced by myself, Dante Stack. Full attribution for the sound effects and music we use on this show from week to week can be found on my show notes page at dantestack.com. Guys, I say this every week, but I'm gonna keep battering this drum until you all listen and do as I say. We need to multiply our numbers. Like us on Facebook. Facebook.com/solvetheworldpodcast. And while you're on Facebook, share our page with others and help me grow this audience. We got a great story running here, guys, and I'm hoping to grow our audience so I can sustain the pace of producing an episode week to week. And I need your help to accomplish that. Alright? Thanks for listening. See you next time. Jenn and company have now seen the ghouls of Pishtaco's Island. There's no camouflaging what's going on. Jenn's seen with her own eyes the connection between this dark place and her dark follower, the Pied Piper. Wherever there's the Piper, there's trouble. Jenn set her heart against him, and against his schemes. She'll do anything to get away from his reach. Next week, Jenn and Lex and Miles will fix their destiny, and the numbered man's true aspirations will be revealed. That's next time on Solve the World.